I thought I was watching my stepdaughter walk across the stage to collect the diploma I had helped earn for her. Through 1,000 small sacrifices, through years of packed lunches and science fair projects and late-night algebra sessions that stretched past midnight while Daniel slept soundly down the hall, I had no idea she was about to turn to the crowd, find my face in the bleachers, and announce to 500 people that I was nothing, that her real mother loved her, that I never had and never would. The worst part was not the words. The words, as cruel as they were, I could perhaps survive. What I could not survive, what I am still not entirely sure I have survived, was the silence from the man sitting beside me. Daniel, my husband of 11 years, the man for whom I had rearranged the entire architecture of my life, sat perfectly still in his navy blazer, with his program folded in half across his knees, and his hands lying completely quiet in his lap, and he did not say a single word, not one. He stared at the stage as though he were watching something that had nothing whatsoever to do with him, and I sat there in my yellow sundress with a white rose bouquet growing heavier in my hands by the second, and I felt the ground beneath my feet quietly, completely, and irreversibly disappear. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up in that gymnasium on a warm June afternoon with a shattered heart and a lap full of flowers nobody wanted, you need to understand who I was before that moment, and who I had believed with every fiber of my foolish, trusting self that we all were together. My name is Claire. I am 41 years old, and for the better part of my adult life, I believed, genuinely and without reservation, that love was enough to build a family on. Not biology, not paperwork, not the approval of a woman 3 towns over who happened to share DNA with the girl I had spent a decade raising. Just love. Patient, consistent, daily, unglamorous love. The kind that shows up not in grand gestures, but in Tuesday mornings and dentist appointments, and the quiet act of remembering how someone takes their tea. I met Daniel at 29. He was 32, a high school history teacher with a quiet, unhurried laugh, and the kind of steady brown eyes that made you feel, inexplicably, that everything was going to be fine. He had a 7-year-old daughter named Maya, and he had been raising her alone for 2 years by the time we met, because Maya's mother, his ex-wife Rachel, had left when Maya was 5 for reasons that were always described in careful, measured terms. She had needed space. She had found herself. She had gone, as I would piece together much later from a dozen half-conversations and carefully averted glances, because she had simply decided that the life she was living was not the life she had imagined for herself, and she had acted accordingly, the way some people do when the cost of staying feels higher than the cost of the wreckage they leave behind. Rachel still lived nearby. She still had joint custody on paper, but in practice, in the actual lived reality of Maya's daily existence, Daniel's house was the only house Maya knew. Rachel showed up when it suited her, which was never reliably and never without some form of complication that required smoothing over afterward. I fell in love with Daniel the slow way, the way you fall in love when you are old enough to know the difference between the dizzy rush of infatuation and the quieter, more durable thing that actually holds. Our first date was coffee at a diner 3 blocks from his school, and he spent the first 20 minutes apologizing for being distracted before he finally admitted that Maya had called him 4 times that morning because she'd had a nightmare and couldn't settle. I told him to go to her. He looked at me like I had said something in an unfamiliar language. He went. I paid the check, left a good tip, and walked to my car in the autumn cold, feeling something warm and certain settle in my chest, because I knew, the way you know things before you can articulate them, that this man was worth every complication that came with him. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. 2 careful, deliberate years of building something real and slow and solid, the way you build anything you intend to last. I met Maya on a rainy Sunday in October, 3 months in, when Daniel decided the time was finally right. She was 9 years old and small for her age, with her father's grave brown eyes and her mother's stubborn, appraising set of the jaw, and she looked at me the way a child looks at someone when she has been disappointed before and has decided never to be caught off guard again. She did not smile that first afternoon. She shook my hand, oddly formal for a 9-year-old, achingly adult, and returned to her book without ceremony. I did not push. I brought snacks. I asked questions and accepted the silences that answered them. I showed up week after week with a patience I had not known I possessed until one Sunday afternoon she laughed at something I said, genuinely, startled out of herself, her hand flying up to cover her mouth as though laughter were something she needed to contain. And I felt something loosen in my chest that had been held tightly closed for longer than I cared to admit. We moved in together when Maya was 11. I was careful about it. I gave her agency over her room, over the household rhythms, over the small negotiations of daily domestic life. I did not try to replace Rachel. I was not naive enough to attempt it, and I would not have wanted to even if the attempt had been possible. I was not Maya's mother. I was something else. Something that did not yet have a clean, socially legible name. The woman who made her breakfast on school days, who drove her to soccer practice and waited in the parking lot through every drizzly Wednesday evening practice for 3 years, who sat up through 3 rounds of strep throat with a cool cloth and children's Tylenol, who checked her homework and told her, every single day, in every small way available to me, that she was intelligent and capable and worth every minute of everything. I called it love. I still call it love. I cannot think of a more accurate word. Daniel and I married the summer Maya turned 12. It was a small wedding, 40 people in a garden, no fuss, no elaborate production. Maya was our flower girl. She wore white with yellow ribbons, and she walked down the aisle ahead of me with the concentrated seriousness of someone performing a sacred civic duty. And at the altar, when I reached Daniel's side, she reached up and took my hand without being asked and held it for the entire rest of the service. I cried. I am not ashamed of it. I have never been ashamed of it. For several years afterward, things were genuinely good. Not perfect. Nothing with a teenager in the house is perfect, and living with Maya was its own particular form of atmospheric weather, capable of shifting from bright sun to electrical storm in the span of a hallway, but substantively, meaningfully good. We had rituals. Sunday morning pancakes with too much butter, a TV drama we watched together on Friday evenings with elaborate commentary, an annual tradition of going to the midnight showing of whatever big franchise film opened that summer, which Maya had started doing ironically at 13 and continued doing sincerely long after the irony had faded. Daniel and I were happy. We had built something real and warm and full of ordinary daily grace, and I was proud of it in the quiet, private way you are proud of things you have worked hard to earn. But Rachel was always there, not physically. She kept her distance for years, and the arrangement worked, in the fragile way that arrangements work when everyone is being careful and no one is being entirely honest. She existed in the spaces between things, in the way Maya would go quiet and inward after a phone call, in the way certain conversations about Rachel's apartment, about Rachel's new relationship, about Rachel's version of her own absence from Maya's childhood, were always gently, carefully, never fully resolved. I told myself it was normal, that children of divorce carry two worlds inside them, and that the job of a step-parent is to be solid, reliable ground, not to compete with a ghost, not to demand allegiance, not to force a child to choose between the person who raised her and the person who was supposed to. I was proud of my restraint. I considered it a virtue. I was wrong about that, too, as it turns out. The first sign I noticed, or rather the first one I could no longer convincingly explain away, arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March when Maya was 16. It was cold and gray outside, the tail end of a winter that had gone on too long, and I had picked her up from school because Daniel had a staff meeting that ran late. She was quiet in the car in a way that was different from her ordinary teenage quiet. Heavier, deliberate, the kind of silence that has something underneath it. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I asked if something had happened at school. She said no. I let it rest because letting things rest with Maya had always worked better than pressing. And when we got home, I made her a cup of tea and set it on her desk without comment. She said thank you without looking up from her phone. Her voice was flat and careful, clipped in a way I couldn't place. Later that evening, after dinner, pasta with the garlic bread she liked, a meal she had specifically requested 2 days earlier and had barely touched, I heard her on the phone in her room. The door was closed. I was not listening at the keyhole, but I could hear the register of her voice, the particular frequency of it, and what I heard was a voice I had not heard from Maya in years, young and a little raw and searching, the voice of a child who needs comfort and has found, somewhere, an unexpected source of it. And then a laugh, genuine, relieved, the kind of laugh that sounds like something releasing. I stood in the hallway outside her closed door for one moment with a towel folded over my arm from the laundry I'd been carrying, and then I walked to the kitchen and told myself I was overreacting, that teenagers talked on the phone, that a laugh was just a laugh. I was not overreacting. I know that now with the absolute clarity of someone who has been handed, finally and too late, all the pieces of a picture that was assembled in secret while she was looking in the wrong direction. What I heard that night was the beginning of something that had been in motion for months without my knowledge, months during which I had been carrying on with the daily work of our lives. Cooking dinner, managing the household budget, maintaining the garden, supporting Daniel through a difficult semester, attending Maya's school events with reliable, cheerful, undramatic consistency. While in the background, a conversation was happening that I was not part of and had not been consulted about and was never meant to know. Rachel had started calling. Not through the official custody channels, not through the carefully maintained parental communication protocols that had governed their arrangement for years, but directly and privately to Maya's phone, in the evenings, after dinner, in the hours I had always assumed were simply the ordinary quiet hours of a teenage girl's private life. The calls were long, an hour sometimes, occasionally more, and they left Maya distant and slightly altered in the days that followed, as though she had returned from somewhere and was still in the process of finding her footing back in the ordinary world of our house. I didn't know the content of those calls. I didn't know that Rachel had decided, after years of convenient geographic and emotional distance, that she wanted to be a mother again, and that whatever version of motherhood she was constructing in those late evening conversations required a particular kind of narrative, one in which her absence had been justified, her return was heroic, and the woman who had stepped in to do her job for the past 7 years was merely an inconvenient footnote. I didn't know any of that. I only knew what I could observe, that Maya was changing in small but accumulating ways, and that the change had a direction to it, a vector, and the vector pointed away from me. She stopped asking me to proofread her essays. She stopped watching our Friday shows without explaining why. She started saying "my mom" in contexts where she had previously said Rachel, or sometimes nothing at all, as though asserting a category that needed reinforcing, a relationship whose reality required active maintenance. She started coming home from the irregular visits she had always made to Rachel's apartment looking slightly polished, slightly altered, wearing small tokens I did not recognize, a necklace, a bracelet, a particular shade of lip gloss, as though she had been dressed by someone for a performance. I noticed. I cataloged. And I told myself, with increasing desperation, that it was normal, that it was developmental, that it was the ordinary, painful, non-personal process of a teenage girl individuating from the adults around her, and that it had nothing to do with me specifically. 3 months before graduation, I found the first note. It was not hidden, or rather, it had not been hidden carefully enough, which in retrospect I think was itself a choice, conscious or not. It was folded inside Maya's copy of a novel she had left on the kitchen counter, a bookmark she had forgotten to remove or perhaps had never intended to conceal. It fell out when I moved the book to wipe down the counter, and I picked it up meaning to replace it without reading it, and then I read it. It was in Rachel's handwriting. I recognized it from the occasional cards and letters that had passed through the house over the years. And it was short, only 4 lines, but those 4 lines sat in my stomach like something cold and heavy for the rest of the afternoon. You know who is really there for you. You know who loves you. Don't forget what matters when the day comes. I'll be so proud of you, baby. Your real family will be there. I stood at the kitchen counter with the note in my hand and the smell of the cleaning spray still sharp in the air around me. And I read those 4 lines 3 times. Your real family. I put the note back exactly where it had been. I finished cleaning the counter. I started dinner. And when Maya came downstairs an hour later and picked up her book from the counter without acknowledging me, I said, "How was your day?" And she said, "Fine." And we moved through the evening like 2 people who shared a house and very little else, and I did not say a word about what I had read. I told Daniel that night. We were in bed, the room dark and quiet, and I kept my voice calm and measured because I knew that Daniel responded badly to what he experienced as pressure, and I needed him to actually hear me rather than to retreat into the defensive, placating distance he adopted when he felt cornered. I told him about the note. I told him what it said. There was a silence. He shifted beside me, and I could feel the particular quality of the silence, the texture of it, the way it was slightly too long to be simply thoughtful. "She probably just means Rachel's side of the family," he said at last. "You know Rachel, she can be dramatic." "Daniel," I said. "It said your real family." "I know what it said." Another silence. "I'll talk to Rachel." "Did you know she's been calling Maya every night?" "They talk sometimes. It's healthy for Maya to have a relationship with her mother." "It's healthy," I agreed carefully, "but something has shifted, and I think we need to pay attention to it." He said he would talk to Rachel. He said it in the tone he used when he wanted a conversation to be finished. I lay in the dark and listened to his breathing slow and deepen into sleep while I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the note and about the necklace Maya had come home wearing last month, and about the way she said "my mom" now, and about the graduation that was 3 months away. The ceremony I had already bought a new dress for, a yellow one, because Maya had mentioned once, years ago, that yellow was her favorite color, and I had been carrying that small piece of information like a talisman ever since. I thought about all of it, lying in the dark beside my sleeping husband, and I told myself that I was catastrophizing, that it would be fine, that the love I had given this girl for 9 years was real and substantial and would hold. I had never been more wrong about anything in my life. The weeks between finding that note and graduation morning moved the way time moves before something catastrophic, slower than usual in the days, faster than you can bear in the aggregate. By the morning of the ceremony, I had packed down my unease into something manageable and decided to simply be present. I put on my yellow dress. I gathered the white rose bouquet, 12 roses, because white is the color of beginnings. I followed my family to the car and told myself everything would be fine. The gymnasium at Westfield High held every one of its 550 seats that morning, plus a wall of heat that hit you at the door like a physical thing. I found us good seats, center bleachers, 8 rows up, and settled the bouquet in my lap and found Maya's name in the program and waited. The ceremony began at 10. The principal spoke. The valedictorian spoke about resilience and the long road ahead. I watched Maya in the second row of the graduating class, and I noticed with a dull, quiet lurch that she kept craning her neck toward the entrance doors, looking for someone not yet there. Rachel arrived 15 minutes in. I became aware of her only when Maya's entire body changed. Spine straightening, shoulders lifting, a small private smile crossing her face as she looked toward the back of the room. I turned and found her, still striking at 43, in a red dress precisely calibrated to be noticed, scanning the bleachers with the calm, proprietary gaze of someone arriving somewhere she considers entirely her own. Her eyes met mine briefly across the crowded gym. She smiled, wide, warm, reaching nowhere near her eyes, and looked away. Beside me, Daniel had gone very still. I turned to look at him. He was staring at his program. I said quietly, "You knew she was coming." He said equally quietly without looking up, "She has every right to be here." And that was the end of that conversation. I watched Maya walk across the stage. I watched her shake the principal's hand and accept her diploma and scan the bleachers, not the general, savoring look of someone marking a milestone, but the specific, searching look of someone locating a particular face. She found Rachel first. The smile that came onto her face was open and lit from somewhere deep inside, and it was not a smile I recognized from 11 years of mornings and dinners and late-night homework sessions. Then her eyes found me. I was smiling. I had made a deliberate decision to smile, because this was her day, and I was going to be present for it regardless of the complicated thing running underneath everything. I raised the bouquet slightly toward her, an offering, and Maya looked at me steadily for 3 full seconds, with an expression that gave me nothing back. She looked at me the way you look at furniture. Then she turned to the microphone. Her voice, amplified and carrying to every corner of the gym, said, "I want to thank my mom, Rachel Morrison, for always being there for me. My real mom. The one who actually loves me. Some people try to take that place. They can't. Blood is everything." 500 people reacted in various ways. Some applauded, not knowing. Some went very quiet. Those who knew us looked directly at me, and what was on their faces ranged from shock to a peculiar, uncomfortable fascination. 2 sections over, Rachel was clapping with her hands raised above her head, beaming, her face lit with a satisfaction that went far beyond maternal pride. I sat very still. I was aware of everything with a clarity that felt almost painful. The industrial floor cleaner beneath the mass of perfumes, the stiff edge of the bleacher seat against my thighs, the yellow dress which now felt like the most wrong choice I had ever made. I was aware, most of all, of the precise quality of Daniel's silence. Not the silence of a stunned man, not the silence of someone gathering himself to respond, but the silence of a man who has been waiting for something to arrive and has, now that it has, retreated to a place inside himself where he cannot be reached. I turned and looked at him. His face was blank and carefully composed. What I saw in his eyes was not shock. It was relief, the relief of someone released from the burden of a long-held secret. "Did you know she was going to do that?" I asked. "Not exactly," he said. I stood up, put my program on the seat, and walked out. I found him outside 20 minutes later, tie loosened, jacket over his arm, face arranged in preemptive apology. I said, "You knew." Not exactly." "You knew." He checked the door behind him, checking whether they were coming. And in that single glance, I had my answer before he spoke. He told me Rachel had called a few weeks ago, that Maya wanted to say something about family at the ceremony, that Rachel said it would be good for Maya's healing, that he had told Rachel he wasn't sure it was appropriate, that he had then sat beside me for an hour and said nothing. "You let me walk in there in this dress with these flowers," I said very quietly, "and you said nothing." He looked at the parking lot. He said he hadn't known she would phrase it quite like that. I walked to the car alone and sat with the roses in my lap and the windows down. Something happened inside me while I waited. Something I would try to describe to Nora later and never quite find the right words for. A temperature change. The difference between a fire that burns ragged and wild and the same heat compressed into something flat and blue and steady. I felt it move through me and settle. By the time Daniel got into the car and started the engine without speaking, I was already a different person than the one who had sat down in those bleachers that morning. The documents were in his home office. I found them that evening while looking for our car insurance. I'd scraped a post in the parking lot on the way out, a mundane errand entirely accidental. Filing cabinet, second drawer, a folder labeled simply M, 4 documents. A lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in the Riverside district in Rachel's name, signed 8 months ago. A letter from a private family mediator documenting 6 sessions, conducted over 5 months, without my knowledge, between Daniel, Rachel, and Maya, discussing Maya's transition to an environment more conducive to her relationship with her biological mother. My name appeared twice, once as Daniel's current partner, once in a sentence noting that Claire's involvement in future family discussions would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. All parties agreed: Daniel, Rachel, Maya. A financial summary with Daniel's handwriting in the margins, breaking down the mortgage, the joint accounts, the investment account I had contributed to for 8 years, the account annotated in his neat, precise hand with the words, "Division pending," and a printed screenshot of a text conversation between Daniel and Rachel, dated 6 weeks before graduation. Rachel: "She's ready. After the ceremony, we'll take her to the apartment and you can have the conversation with Claire. It's cleaner that way." Daniel, after an 11-minute gap, Okay. I stood in that office in the fading evening light, and I did not shake. I photographed all 4 documents before replacing them exactly as I had found them, because some clear and self-preserving part of me was already thinking about evidence and records and what you need when a conversation becomes official. Then I called Nora. She answered on the second ring. I said, "I need you to come over. Bring your car. I'll need somewhere to stay tonight." She said, "I'm leaving now." No questions. 14 years of friendship, and she had always known when questions could wait. I stood in the center of Daniel's office and looked at the framed photo on his shelf. Maya at 8, laughing on his shoulders at some county fair, my face visible at the very edge of the frame, almost completely cropped out. And I felt the last remnant of the woman I had been that morning finally leave me. The woman in the yellow dress with the white roses. She had given 11 years of herself freely and gladly and without condition, and she was gone. What remained was quieter, considerably more purposeful, and very, very clear about what came next. Nora arrived at 9:15, still in the clothes she'd worn to her sister's dinner, her coat unbuttoned and her car keys in her hand like someone who had driven fast without entirely meaning to. She came through the front door. I had left it unlocked. And she found me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched and the 4 photographs on my phone lined up in a row. She sat down across from me without taking her coat off. She looked at the photographs. She looked at me. She said, with the flat, measured precision of a woman who has always understood the value of accuracy in a crisis, "How long have you known?" "About the documents? 2 hours," I said. "About the rest of it, the real shape of it. I think part of me has known for months and kept finding reasons not to." She nodded. She did not say, "I told you so," which was one of Nora's finest qualities. She had, in fact, told me so. Not about the documents, not about the specifics, but she had said 6 months ago, carefully and with great love, that something in the dynamic between Daniel and his ex-wife had never properly resolved, and that the things we choose not to see have a way of asserting themselves eventually. She had said it once and then left it alone, because Nora understood the particular stubbornness of a woman who has invested 11 years in a belief and is not ready to release it. She had waited, and now she was here. "What do you want to do?" she said. "I want to know the full extent of it," I said. "Before I do anything else, I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with. The financial exposure, the legal position, all of it. I need a lawyer." "My brother-in-law," Nora said immediately. "Marcus. Family law, 15 years. I'll call him in the morning." "Tonight," I said, "please." She looked at me for a moment, reading something in my face, and then she took out her phone. Marcus Oyalaran returned Nora's call at 10:45 that night, and we spoke for 40 minutes with my phone on speaker and Nora beside me at the kitchen table, taking notes in her neat, compressed handwriting. I described the documents. He asked specific questions. The wording of the financial summary, the nature of the mediator's letter, whether my name was on the mortgage, what the investment account was structured as, whether there had been any recent changes to joint account access. His voice was calm and professional and utterly without drama, which was exactly what I needed at 10:45 at night when my own internal state was balanced on a very fine edge. By the end of the call, he had told me 3 things I needed to know: that as a co-mortgager, I had full legal standing to contest any property disposition without my consent, that the investment account, having been funded jointly, was marital property regardless of how Daniel had annotated it in his personal notes, and that the mediation sessions, conducted without my knowledge or participation regarding decisions that directly affected me, had no legal weight whatsoever and would likely be viewed dimly by a court if it came to that. "It may not come to that," Marcus said near the end of the call, "but you should act as though it might. Document everything. Don't move any money. Don't sign anything. And don't have any significant conversations with your husband before we've met in person." I said I understood. I said I would be in his office first thing Monday morning. I thanked him and ended the call, and Nora and I sat in the kitchen for another hour, going through everything, not planning exactly, but building a clear map of the terrain. I had stopped shaking somewhere around the second hour after finding the documents. What had replaced the shaking was something I can only describe as altitude, a kind of clear, oxygenless calm that you reach when you go high enough above the ground that ordinary weather no longer affects you. I was very calm. I was very clear. And I was, in a way I had not expected, no longer sad. I was past sad. Sadness requires a degree of uncertainty, a lingering question of whether things might have been different, might yet be different. I had no more uncertainty. The documents had removed it. Division pending. Okay. 2 phrases that closed every door I had been standing in front of for years, uncertain whether to knock. Daniel came home at 11:30. I heard his key in the lock, his footsteps in the hallway, his pause at the kitchen door when he registered that Nora was there. He looked at her. He looked at me. He said, "Claire." And I said, "Not tonight, Daniel." He stood in the doorway for a long moment calculating, and then he went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close, not slammed. Nothing so honest as a slam, but shut with the careful, deliberate quietness of a man managing his image even in an empty hallway. Nora stayed until midnight. She offered to stay longer. I told her I was fine, which was true in every way that mattered. I was not going to fall apart in the dark. I was done falling apart. I met Marcus on Monday morning in an office that smelled of old paper and air conditioning and had a particular quality of fluorescent light that makes everything look like evidence. He was a compact, careful man in his mid-40s with a habit of picking up his pen and setting it down again while he thought, and he laid the situation out with the clean, unsentimental directness of someone who has dealt with many versions of this story and respects his clients enough not to soften it. My position was strong. The mortgage was in both names. The investment account was jointly held. Any attempt to dispose of shared assets without my consent was legally actionable, and given the documented evidence of planning, the printed texts, the mediator sessions, the financial notations, there was a reasonable argument for bad faith in the management of marital finances. "He was planning to present you with a fait accompli," Marcus said, setting down his pen. "The idea was that by the time you found out, the emotional landscape would have shifted enough, Maya gone, the narrative established, that you'd accept whatever arrangement he proposed, because the alternative would mean a fight." "He didn't know me very well," I said. Marcus almost smiled. "Evidently not. I authorized him to send Daniel's attorney. I had confirmed by then that Daniel had one, a formal letter establishing my legal position and requesting a full accounting of all shared assets. I also authorized him to issue a second letter, this one to the private mediation service, formally disputing the validity of the sessions and requesting disclosure of all documentation produced therein. Neither letter was aggressive. Both were precise. Both said, in language that required no interpretation, "I know, I am prepared. Come carefully." The confrontation with Daniel happened that evening. Not the screaming confrontation you might expect, not the door-slamming demolition of 11 years in one operatic scene. Nothing like that. It happened in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I had made Maya's tea for years, where we had had 100 Sunday morning breakfasts, where I had stood 2 nights ago reading a financial summary with the words, "division pending," written in the handwriting of the man I had married. We sat on opposite sides of the table, and Daniel looked, for the first time in the entire unraveling of this disaster, genuinely frightened. Not of me specifically, of the version of me that had consulted a lawyer and was sitting across from him in a clean shirt with a calm face and no roses. He tried to explain. He said it had started as a theoretical conversation with Rachel years ago about what would happen if Maya wanted to be closer to her biological mother as she got older. He said it had grown from there without him fully realizing it. He said Rachel was persuasive, and he was tired, and he had wanted to give everyone what they wanted, and had understood, somewhere in the middle of trying to do that there was no version in which everyone got what they wanted, and that he had chosen, at some point he could not precisely identify, to protect himself first and tell me the truth later. "When?" I said. "When were you going to tell me?" He said he had been planning to tell me after graduation, when things had settled. "After the ceremony," I said. "After she'd said it publicly, when it was already done." He said he knew how it sounded. "I don't think you do," I said. "If you did, you wouldn't have done it." I paused. "I spoke to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from him." I watched Daniel's face. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I deserve what I'm legally entitled to, and because what you were planning, the quiet disposal, the fait accompli, the version where I just accept whatever you decided, that isn't going to happen. I'm going to be treated fairly, Daniel, or I'm going to be treated fairly by a judge. Those are your 2 options." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Claire." And I looked at him across the table, and I believed that he meant it. I also understood that it was entirely too late for it to matter. Maya called me 3 days after graduation. I was in Nora's spare room by then, with a small bag of clothes and my laptop and my documents folder, building the quiet scaffolding of a new daily life. When her name appeared on my screen, I sat with the phone in my hand for 3 full rings before I answered, because I needed to decide in those 3 rings what I was willing to give. I answered. She spoke first. She said she had been thinking about what she said, that she had practiced it differently in her room for weeks, had planned something more measured, something that acknowledged different kinds of family without erasing any of them, that on the day, standing at the microphone with Rachel's face in her peripheral vision and Rachel's version of history living inside her chest, alongside mine, like 2 weather systems that had been at war for years, she had said the crueler version. She said she didn't know exactly why. She said she thought maybe she had been angrier than she'd known. She said she was sorry. I listened. I did not rush to fill the silence when she finished. Then I said, "I know you're angry. I understand there are things about your childhood, about your mother leaving, about what that meant for you, that have nothing to do with me but that I became a container for anyway because I was there, and Rachel wasn't. I understand that. But what you said hurt me in a room full of people, and your father let it happen, and the 2 of them and Rachel have been making plans about my life without me for 2 years. That's what I'm dealing with, not just your words." There was a long pause. She said quietly, "I didn't know about the plans." "I believe you," I said, and I did. Maya had been a tool in something larger than herself, which did not excuse what she had done, but did explain it in a way that left room, eventually, for something other than permanent severance. That doesn't change what needs to happen legally, but it changes how I think about you. She asked if she could see me. I said not yet. I said in time. If she wanted to rebuild something, we could try, but that it would have to be on new terms, honest terms, terms where I was a person with standing rather than a variable to be managed. She said she understood. She sounded, for the first time in perhaps 2 years, like the girl I had known. The legal process took 4 months. Marcus was methodical and thorough and entirely without drama, which made him extraordinarily effective. The financial settlement was equitable. My full share of the investment account, fair market compensation for my contributions to the mortgage over 11 years, a clean division with no outstanding claims. Daniel did not contest it seriously. I think, in the end, he understood that he owed me at least the dignity of not making me fight for what was already mine. Rachel, for her part, discovered that a private mediation service, which conducts sessions without the knowledge of an affected party, cannot protect itself particularly well when that party retains counsel. The letter Marcus sent prompted a quiet but significant internal review at the service, and a public note of apology was issued regarding their failure to verify consent of all materially affected parties before proceeding. It was not a dramatic outcome. It was not a courtroom reckoning, but it was documented and it was on record, and the mediator personally called me to apologize, and that was enough. 7 months later, I am sitting on the porch of an apartment I chose alone, the second floor of a converted Victorian house with wide plank floors and a bay window full of afternoon light and a kitchen that smells of the herbs I have been attempting, with mixed success, to grow on the windowsill. It is a Saturday morning in January. My coffee is exactly the right temperature. Nora is coming for lunch. Marcus, who settled my case 4 months ago, has become something more like a friend. My parents, back from Portugal, call every Sunday, and my mother has begun ending our calls by saying, with a warmth that costs her nothing and gives me everything, "We're proud of you, Claire." I am not sure I had heard that specific combination of words before. I am finding I can hold it without flinching. I think about Maya sometimes. We have met twice. Coffee, both times. A cafe on neutral ground. Both of us sitting across from each other with the careful attention of people who share a history and are trying to decide what to make of it going forward. The second meeting was easier than the first. She is at university now, living in Rachel's spare room in the Riverside apartment, navigating a version of closeness with her biological mother that I suspect is not quite what either of them imagined. I do not take satisfaction in that. I take, if anything, something closer to recognition. The understanding that the things we want desperately and pursue without honesty rarely look, when we finally have them, like what we thought they would. Maya is learning that. She is 18 and she has time. I do not miss Daniel, which surprised me at first and no longer does. I miss the idea of what we were, the feeling of being part of something that held. But the thing I am grieving is not the man himself, who turned out to be someone I did not entirely know, but rather the version of the future I had been quietly, constantly building in my mind for 11 years. A future that included a stepdaughter who grew up and came home for holidays and called me sometimes for no particular reason. That future is gone, and its loss is real, and I am not pretending otherwise. But in its place there is this: an apartment full of light, a kitchen that is entirely my own, a Saturday morning that belongs to no one but me. There is, unexpectedly, a great deal of peace in that. The herbs on the windowsill are coming along. The basil, at least, has decided to survive. I take this as a reasonable omen. I stood at a microphone once, not literally, not in a gymnasium with 500 witnesses, but in every way that matters. I had been handed a life and a family, and I had stood up and said, "I'm here. I'm staying. This is real." And it was taken from me in the particular way that things are taken when the people who should protect you choose their own comfort instead. But what I know now, that I did not know before, is this. Love given freely and without condition does not diminish simply because it is refused. It does not become retroactively false because the people it was given to were not ready to receive it honestly. I loved Maya for 9 years. Those 9 years were real. The woman who lived them was real. And she did not disappear in a gymnasium on a June afternoon when a girl pointed a microphone at her and declared her nothing. She walked out the side door. She photographed the documents. She called her lawyer, and then she built something better.